From the 11 Alive studios, this is The Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Well, good morning and welcome into The Georgia Vote. I'm Zach Merchant. Faith Jesse is off today. We begin with Georgia lawmakers debating a bill that could encourage lawsuits against cities that they say are not enforcing federal immigration laws. The measure targets so-called sanctuary cities, though no Georgia city identifies itself that way. 11 Alive's Doug Richards has a look at what the lawmakers are trying to do.
When an undocumented immigrant murdered college student Laken Riley in Athens, Republicans claimed Athens-Clarke County deserved at least some of the blame because of liberal policies protecting immigrants. Now, Republicans want to make Georgia cities like Athens pay for damages in such cases.
That you should not have sanctuary policies.
Though Athens never called itself a sanctuary city, Republicans say they know one when they see it. This bill, they say, would deter such cities by waiving the legal immunity they'd normally have against civil lawsuits.
We are not going to give an immense privilege in the courts to a local government not acting in the best public interest of our citizens.
I could see a cottage industry rising.
But an attorney representing counties told lawmakers their bill would motivate lawyers looking for cash judgments to target cities with deep pockets.
What I think is likely to happen is with these waiver of immunities, there will be efforts by plaintiffs' lawyers to turn everything into a sanctuary policy.
Republican lawmakers passed another bill last year that punished so-called sanctuary cities. The election of Donald Trump since then has fed their appetite. At the Capitol, Doug Richards, 11 Alive News.
Now, that bill has passed the Senate back in February, but it has not yet passed the House. Of course, we are now 3 full weeks left in the legislative session. There is still a lot of unfinished business to get through in that time frame. Here are some of the other major pieces of legislation still being considered under the Gold Dome. Governor Brian Kemp's top priority legislation to limit lawsuit verdicts, referred to by some as tort reform. That bill passed the Senate earlier in the session. Also, a high-profile school safety measure backed by, among others, House Speaker John Burns. And legislative efforts focused on gender identity, including a bill that would limit transgender athletes' access to public school sports. The final day of the session, also known as Sine Die, is Friday, April 4th. Meanwhile, U.S. Department of Education leaders this week announced plans to lay off more than 1,000 staffers as part of the Trump administration's ongoing effort to shrink the federal workforce. We asked Brian Johnson, the superintendent of Atlanta Public Schools, how it could impact the school system he leads. He said at this point it's too early to tell what impact, if any, there could be. But he argued that the federal agency provides valuable support to his students.
When you think about the work that the federal government has done and the Department of Ed, we know their focus has been around the least of these, those that need it the most. And as a school district, an urban school district that serves so many kids that are economically disadvantaged, that live with home insecurity, food insecurity, you name it, the programs and such that the federal government has offered are important to us.
Johnson said he is hoping the layoffs do not impact any of those programs. And in an emailed statement, a Department of Education spokesperson said to 11 Alive News that the cuts would have no impact on department funding to public schools. Meanwhile, the nation's Ag Secretary, Brooke Rollins, was under the Gold Dome this past week, touting an upcoming influx of money to help people still recovering from last year's Hurricane Helene. This is coming from a $100 billion disaster relief package passed by Congress just before Christmas. In it was a deadline of this coming Friday, March 21st, to hand out the money. But Rollins says farmers may be getting it a little sooner.
The disaster and emergency relief, both for Helene, but also for our farmers that are hurting. That money will begin to move in the next few weeks. We were given a deadline by Congress, which isn't often met, but for me, it was very important we meet it.
Well, 2025 is an off-cycle election year, but not for Atlanta residents. This fall, they'll go to the polls to select the city's next mayor, and incumbent Andre Dickens is asking for another 4 years on the job. This past week, Mayor Dickens made his re-election bid official with a campaign kickoff event at his election headquarters. Speaking to press there, he emphasized what he sees as his accomplishments from the first term he served, like increased affordable housing and infrastructure improvements. Dickens' path to his first term in the mayor's office involved a heated runoff race with then City Council President Felicia Moore after he came in second place in the general election race. Addressing the press at the kickoff of his new campaign, Mayor Dickens says there is more work left to be done.
As I ran for mayor back in 2021, the goal was to serve for 8 years, 2 terms, all the way to 2030, to be able to deliver all the things that we talked about. And I had this dream since I was 16 years old to become mayor of Atlanta. God and good people like these right here have blessed me to be able to be the mayor of Atlanta. So I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for the cabinet and team at the city of Atlanta that have delivered all the success that we have for the people of Atlanta.
Well, Andre Dickens is gearing up for his 2025 mayoral race, and statewide races in 2026, they're starting to feel closer and closer now as well. Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr has formally announced he is running for governor in 2026. He's hoping to follow fellow Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who is term limited and cannot run again. We sit down with the Republican lawmaker in this week's Sunday Conversation, and we start, of course, with the biggest question. Why do you want to be Georgia's next governor?
Well, because we're the model for the nation. And I've been fortunate enough to work in this state. I worked for Johnny Isakson. I worked economic development under Nathan Deal, and I've now worked with Brian Kemp. And we're the model because of jobs and safety. You are either in the state of Georgia because you came here for a job, you stayed here for a job, you came here for college, but that's what we have, how this state has been built over the last several decades, jobs and then safety. And in this state, we focused on both of those issues. And in addition, look, I've worked for some great folks. And over the last, 2 or 3 decades, we've done it because of good, traditional Georgia conservatives. We've got to keep this state red. We've got to continue to do the things that we've done to be successful over those last 2 or 3 decades. And I've worked arm in arm, side by side with Governor Kemp and others to make sure that we do it. We've got to keep doing what we're doing.
There's been a lot of legislative effort surrounding school safety, particularly in the wake of the awful Appalachia High School shooting in 2024. How do you propose Georgia keeps its school students safe?
Well, I think what is happening now in the legislature, the debate and the discussion and the resources the governor's put forth and the legislature have is incredible. So I would support that as well. I think when you're looking at keeping kids safe, school resource officers are critically important. Hardening the asset itself, the school itself, making sure that you've got safe doors and windows and protecting the building itself. But also, you want to have that, and I know the legislature has discussed this a little bit, you want to be able to have folks on the inside that are teachers and counselors and principals and parents and others, that when threats are made by students, that there's a conversation about what needs to be done.
Democrats in the state legislature have advanced some positions that they say would in some ways restrict access to firearms in certain cases, and they see that as a component of keeping schools safe. Do you support any efforts like that?
No, I'll tell you, I don't, because here's why. Every day we focus, whether it's gangs, whatever it may be, on those that either illegally possess or illegally use or improperly use a firearm. My problem is every time somebody uses a weapon from a criminal perspective, somebody wants to take away my ability to own a firearm. And I support the right of a law-abiding citizen in this state to defend him or herself, his or her property, his or her family. I just believe it's constitutional and it's fundamental.
President Trump won our state and effectively swept the board in battleground states when it comes to the Electoral College in 2024. But as a breakdown of the actual vote, President Trump won Georgia by just about 2%. If you win the election here, if you become Georgia's governor, how do you lead a state that is still very closely politically divided?
Yeah, again, because I think you focus on the basics. You focus on trying to provide the people of Georgia with an opportunity to have a job, and you keep them safe. Those are the issues that people care about. We saw it in the state of Georgia. You can be a Republican, or you can be a persuadable voter. You may want Donald Trump in Washington, D.C., and you want a Brian Kemp or a Chris Carr in the state of Georgia. And we've shown that. I've been through 3 statewide races. I was on the ballot with Governor Kemp, and in 2022, in the primary 22, he and I both got 74% of the vote in a very difficult cycle. But what that tells me is the people of our state said, we like your brand of Georgia conservatism. We like your brand of leadership.
Do you see that as a different brand of conservatism than perhaps what President Trump lives out?
I see it as what our state has been and what has become. I've given you the names of some folks. If you go back a couple of decades, you can see, again, the Johnny Isaacsons, the Nathan Deals, and the Brian Kemps. But you can go back even to a Zell Miller, where this is what we have focused on. I mean, the Olympics were a turning point for our state. For our state, we showed the world that we were a great place to do business, we were a great place to raise a family, and we care about keeping people safe, and we care about the basics of government. That's what you want in this state. But so absolutely, Brian Kemp has been masterful in how he has governed this state. There is no doubt he is a conservative. He is a Georgia conservative. He told people in 2018 and 2022 who he was going to be, and he has been it, and he's been a fantastic governor. That's the model. Brian Kemp is the model for this state, and I am so proud to have worked shoulder to shoulder with him to help bring jobs to this state and keep folks safe.
If you're elected governor of Georgia, your vision for our state over the course of that potential term in office, what does it look like?
Well, it's going to be continuing to be a state where businesses want to start, they want to locate, they want to stay here, families want to be here, and they're going to know no matter where they live in this state, no matter who they are, they're safe.
That is just part of our interview. You can see our full conversation, including a discussion of the Attorney General's gang prosecution efforts, right now on the 11 Alive Plus app. And right after the break, we'll take these headlines into the Politics Roundtable with our guests Spiro Amburn and Fred Hicks. And later, this week's Voice of the Voter shares his thoughts as a native of Denmark, now working and living here in Georgia, on the potential of tariff-driven trade war with the United States. Welcome back into the Georgia Vote. A major pullback for the Trump administration impacting Metro Atlanta. On Thursday, the White House withdrew the nomination of Dr. David Weldon to lead the CDC. The news broke less than an hour before a planned hearing on the former Florida congressman's nomination. Weldon was considered to be closely aligned with Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who for years has been one of the nation's leading anti-vaccine activists. In a statement, Weldon says a White House assistant told him that his nomination was being withdrawn because, quote, there were not enough votes to get confirmed. That's national news, but in so many ways, national news is always impacting Georgia, and that is why it's a great time to bring in our weekly Georgia Vote Political Roundtable with two veterans of the panel, Spiro Amburn, a veteran Republican strategist, and Fred Hicks, a veteran Democratic strategist and consultant. It's great to have you both here. Let's start with this. We heard from Republican Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr earlier in the show. He's jumped in with both feet. He's running for governor in 2026. Okay. Spiro, I want to start with you. Who else should we be watching for as we are looking ahead to that election year that is feeling closer and closer?
Sure. Well, I think you have to start by looking at Governor Kemp and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, what they decide to do or not do. Obviously, Governor Kemp is term limited and can't run for governor again. But I think Lieutenant Governor Jones has obviously shown interest in that, but has not made a formal announcement. Once he makes a decision on what he's going to do, then I think you will see a lot of dominoes fall on the Republican side. The session ends on April 4th. I think within 30 days of that, probably by May 1st, you're going to see the floodgates open, would be my guess.
The session ends, and that's sort of the starting bell for campaign season. Really? Is that the case, Fred?
Absolutely. So there is a disclosure period or report that will be due June 30th. And so to Spiro's point and to your point, Zach, once we get past the April 4th session, then people will be in a sprint, not just to announce, but to raise money to have a strong showing on that disclosure report.
We've heard a lot in past panel discussions, and Spiro, you brought this up as well, that Governor Brian Kemp, he's a very popular statewide elected official, a very popular governor, all other things being equal. And we've heard a lot of people, yourself included, say Governor Kemp, he's the first domino to fall. What he decides to do in 2026 or 2028 will help frame out the rest of the race for other folks seeking these major statewide positions. On the Democratic side, Fred, who are you watching for to be getting into these races?
So Spiro used the term domino effect, and I think that's what we're going to see. So in the governor's race, I think we're going to see Congresswoman Lucy McBath. She's filed her preliminary paperwork for that.
The exploratory committee that she spun up about a week ago.
Correct. Former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms continues to send signals that she's considering it. There's a little speculation in Democratic circles that Stacey Abrams, the two-time nominee, is considering it. We also have heard that State Senator Jason Estevez is kicking the tires, as well as former Dept CEO Michael Thurman and other people, like potentially former Chick-fil-A executive Rodney Bullard as well. So that's going to be an interesting field. And once that is settled, then we'll see people slot for other races like Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, State Superintendent of Schools, and all of that. But once that field sort of coalesces, then we'll see everything else.
These are going to be busy, full primaries. Spiro, I want to spend one last moment on this and then shift topics here, but I think it's germane. It's worth mentioning here. And probably on the Democrat side too, Fred, correct me if I'm wrong, but are we gearing up to see a situation in these primaries, particularly for governor, where we're going to see the divisions within the parties? We're going to see some folks stake out a more, relatively speaking, centrist position. You saw Chris Carr really referencing Governor Brian Kemp a lot in that interview.
Right.
We've seen other folks like Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones over the past few years more closely align himself with President Donald Trump. There has been some friction between President Trump and Governor Kemp at times in the past. Are we going to see these dynamics play out in the primary?
Sure, I think you will. I think that's naturally part of the political process, whether it's in the Republican primary or Democrat primary. They all have to, play to the base, so to speak. But the trick to that is also thinking about the general election and, making sure that you can capture middle-of-the-road voters in November. But I definitely think you'll see some of those constitutional officers start to take a look at these statewide races.
Let's shift gears here. We've got about 60 seconds left. Fred, to you, we're in the back half of the legislative session right now. What unfinished business under the Gold Dome are you watching?
So I am watching this bill, the Sanctuary City bill, and then of course the Tort Reform bill is something that we're looking at as well.
Spiro?
Yeah, tort reform, public safety is obviously an issue. The school safety bill, which has passed the House and is now over in the Senate. Tort reform has come from the Senate to the House, so they each have issues in play. The girls' sports issue and the state budget. Frankly, the House has now passed the fiscal year 26 budget over to the Senate, and in these last 3 weeks, you'll see the House and the Senate and the governor's office all negotiating over how that money is going to be spent.
You timed that out so well. The producer is in my ear saying wrap it up, and you ended on the very second. It's almost like you guys have been on the panel before. And good news, because we have more to talk about, and we will continue talking about it right after the break. Welcome back into our political roundtable. There's so much to talk to as this legislative session moves into the back half that we couldn't fit into one block, so we brought you guys back here. Spiro, I want to talk to you first. Governor Brian Kemp's top priority has been tort reform. It's still moving its way through the legislature. Is this going to get passed?
We'll see. I mean, it passed the state Senate, which is very significant. There was an amendment to the bill. It's now in the House, where the Speaker has it in the Rules Committee and a special subcommittee of rules to vet the bill. They've had several hearings. It's obviously generating a lot of attention. Many press conferences at the Capitol.
A really
between
high-profile
business community
thing.
And victims' rights groups. So I suspect that reasonable heads will get together and ultimately they will pass a bill.
On that note, I hate to cut you off, Spiro, about 20 seconds to you. Fred, the governor has threatened calling a special session if this doesn't get done. Could we see that?
I think it's very possible. He, the Lieutenant Governor, and the Speaker have all said this is their top priority. I will say that now that it's moved to the House, that the anti-tort reform groups have really sort of coalesced, and they are mounting a much more vigorous campaign.
So there's a lot more road ahead for tort reform.
A lot more.
Absolutely. Guys, we appreciate it so much as always. And good news, the Georgia vote continues. Up next, it is our voice of the voter, a native of Denmark, now the head of a successful business here in Georgia. Find out how he's maneuvering an ever-changing economic landscape. Up next. Well, we say it every week. You can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. This week's Voice of the Voter takes us to Carroll County to meet Jens Schultz. He was born in Denmark, but he now runs a tool company here in Georgia. He talks with our Faith Jesse about how international affairs impacts his life right here at home.
After sales, the customer service takes an order. It comes in here if it's a custom tool. We then design it in here in the engineering department. We either sell what our parent company makes in Germany or France, We manufacture custom tools here locally in the U.S. We manufacture standard tools for the U.S. market as well. Our customer base is also diverse. It's anywhere from like a two-man cabinet shop up to the world's largest office furniture companies, and then anywhere in between. If it's a steel body tool, it starts in our machine shop. For carbide, it's a wet grind. So you actually have like a grinding wheel that goes in and grinds the blade.
While it's wet. How long does it take to produce them?
So at carbide saw blades, we can grind about 20 minutes. Diamond tool is anywhere from 8 to 12 to 24 hours.
Oh.
So there's a big difference.
What are the dynamics between just American politics and going over to Europe right now? I know you told me that you have parents that are still over in Denmark.
The Europeans are closer to certain conflicts where we have a little distance. And so I think fear is what operates from the European perspective right now. And I think uncertainty is what we're seeing in the U.S.
What are some of the biggest differences from Denmark to Georgia for those who have never been to Denmark?
Size. I mean, everything in the U.S. is just so much bigger. It is just a scale that you can't even imagine. So are the opportunities, and that was one of the things that attracted me to the U.S. Is the saying goes, it's the land of opportunities.
What are you most concerned about when it comes to the state of politics?
I think just the speed of change. I think there needs to be more consideration of adaptability when we look at how fast we can adapt to a economic landscape change. We spoke about tariffs. We have a strong desire to expand manufacturing, but it takes time. So for us to bring in machines and train up people is a long process. So for us to significantly increase our manufacturing here takes 12 to 18 months. So we need time. So my biggest concern would be the speed of change. If we can slow the rate down and give us time to adapt, I think it would be beneficial for everybody.
And what are you most optimistic about?
The speed of change. It's a double-sided sword. I mean, it is one of opportunity, right? So who can adapt the quickest and who can accomplish the most in the shortest amount of time? I mean, it's exciting at the same time. There's so many opportunities that come when there's change, and it also breeds innovation, and our company is known for that. We are an innovative company. We've been an innovator since we were founded, and now we have the opportunity to show what we can do.
Well, we always talk about how there is always a Georgia tie, and that story just shows it. Even when we're talking about international topics, there's a Georgia impact. Of course, we thank you for watching us today, and we hope we will see you back here again next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote.